You forget where you put your keys 10 minutes ago. An elephant, born the same year as you will remember the exact bend in a dried-up river, 30 years from now, in a drought no one warned her about. That sounds like a nice fact. A trivia night fact. But the real answer to why elephants remember is far stranger and far darker than a big brain. Start with the brain itself. An elephant's brain weighs about 11 pounds. Yours weighs about 3. Buried inside that brain is a structure called the hippocampus, the part responsible for turning experience into long-term memory. In elephants, it is proportionally larger than in almost any other land animal, including you. So yes, the hardware is there, but hardware alone doesn't explain what elephants actually do with it. Here is what they do with it. In 1993, researcher Cynthia Moss, who had spent decades studying elephants in Amboseli National Park in Kenya, documented something unsettling. A matriarch, the oldest female in a herd, led her family on a detour of nearly 50 miles to reach a water source that hadn't been used in almost 30 years. There had been no rain to explain it, no obvious trigger. She had simply been there once, as a calf, during an earlier drought. And she remembered. That is not instinct. Instinct doesn't need a map from 3 decades ago. This was memory, stored, retrieved, and acted on, under pressure, to keep an entire family alive. Why would evolution build a creature that carries that much of the past around with it? The answer starts with drought. Elephant herds can go years, sometimes over a decade, between the worst dry spells in a region. A young elephant will never live through enough droughts on her own to learn all the emergency water sources by trial and error. Trial and error in a drought means death. So instead, evolution built a workaround. Let one elephant hold the memory. Let her be old enough to have seen the last crisis. Let the herd's survival depend on her simply not forgetting. This is why matriarchs matter so much, and why removing them is so catastrophic. In 2001, researcher Karen McComb at the University of Sussex ran an experiment across elephant families in Amboseli. She played recorded calls of unfamiliar elephants to different herds and measured how the group reacted. Families led by older matriarchs recognized threats faster and pulled together more effectively than families led by younger ones. Age wasn't just seniority. Age was a library. An older matriarch had heard more voices, remembered more danger, and could tell a stranger from a threat faster than a young leader ever could. So the memory isn't just about water. It's social. It's about who is safe, who is not, and who used to be part of the family before they died or were killed. And that is where the story stops being charming. Because a brain built to hold on to everything does not get to choose what it holds on to. In the 1970s and 80s, large-scale culling operations swept through parts of Africa, killing adult elephants and sometimes leaving young calves alive as witnesses. Decades later, researchers studying those survivors, including work published by psychologist Gay Bradshaw in 2005, found something that should not have been possible in a wild animal. Elephants who had watched their families killed as calves were, decades later, showing symptoms strikingly similar to human post-traumatic stress disorder. Disrupted social behavior, abnormal aggression, hypervigilance around sounds that resembled gunfire, even 30 years on. 30 years. The same memory that finds a river in a drought also holds the sound of a gunshot from childhood, unchanged, unresolved, and ready to surface. There's more. Elephants are one of the only animals, alongside humans, great apes, and a small handful of others, that show behavior around their dead that looks disturbingly close to grief. Researcher Joyce Poole has documented elephants standing over the bones of family members for hours, gently touching the skull and tusks with their trunks, sometimes returning to the same spot years later. They don't do this for just any elephant bones. They react most strongly to the remains of elephants they actually knew. Think about what that requires. Not just recognizing a smell or a shape, recalling a specific individual who is gone and returning to acknowledge that absence. That is memory being used for something evolution never needed to explain. It's not helping anyone find water, It's not keeping anyone safe. It looks, uncomfortably, like mourning. So why would a system built purely for survival produce something that looks so much like sorrow? Maybe because you can't build a brain that remembers who to trust without also building a brain that remembers who it lost. Memory doesn't come with a filter for convenience. The same neural architecture that lets a matriarch save her family from drought is the architecture that keeps a gunshot alive in a survivor's mind for 30 years, and the architecture that brings a mother back to her calf's bones season after season. You cannot have one without risking the others. The upside and the cost are wired into the same 11 pounds of tissue. This is, if you're honest with yourself, uncomfortably familiar. You do this too. You remember the exact tone of voice someone used the day they hurt you, word for word, years after the relationship ended. You remember the smell of a hospital room. You remember a phone call you wish you could forget, on a loop, at 3 in the morning, with no drought to justify it. Your hippocampus doesn't know the difference between a memory that will save your life and a memory that will just replay pain. It stores both with the same indifference an elephant's brain applies to a river and a rifle. Evolution never optimized memory for your comfort. It optimized memory for survival, and survival required holding on to everything, the useful and the unbearable, because sorting them out in advance was never an option nature could afford. So the next time you can't let go of something, a mistake, a person, a version of yourself that no longer exists, you might be tempted to see that as a flaw, a glitch in an otherwise efficient mind. It isn't. It's the oldest system you have, doing exactly what it evolved to do. An elephant crossing 50 miles of dry earth to a river she visited once as a calf isn't lucky to remember. She's using the same unforgiving machinery that also makes her flinch at a sound 30 years old and grieve at a set of bones she recognizes. You forget where you put your keys 10 minutes ago, but somewhere in you is the exact same wiring that never let that matriarch forget her river or her ghosts.